know that moment when you walk into a familiar space and something feels fundamentally wrong? Not dramatically different, just shifted. Like someone rearranged the furniture by inches and your subconscious is screaming that reality has tilted, even though you can't identify exactly what changed. That's precisely how I felt stepping into my Aunt Patricia's sprawling Connecticut colonial that Thanksgiving evening. The warm amber light streaming from every window, the sound of holiday jazz mixing with animated conversation, November slush still clinging to my boots as I scraped them clean on the doormat reading The Blackwood Family in elegant copper lettering. Everything appeared perfect. Aunt Patricia's autumn decorations arranged with interior design, precision. The aroma of sage and butter wafting from the kitchen where something magnificent was clearly roasting. My cousin Victoria's distinctive laughter echoing from the great room, probably entertaining everyone with tales from her latest European escapade. But something felt fundamentally wrong. I hung my jacket in the mahogany coat closet, the same spot I'd used since childhood visits, and that's when I saw it. Above the marble fireplace mantel, where the old family gathering photo used to hang, there was a new one. Professional photography, museum quality frame, everyone looking flawless in that curated artificial way that screams, "We hired someone to make us appear like we belong in Architectural Digest." And I wasn't in it, not awkwardly positioned at the periphery, not softly focused in the background, not even a stray elbow or shoulder accidentally preserved in the composition. I had been meticulously removed from my own bloodline with what must have been surgical digital precision. My face had been completely excised or eliminated, like I'd never existed at all. "Sophia, perfect timing. We're just finishing the wine selection," Aunt Patricia's voice drifted from the kitchen, bright and effervescent, like nothing was amiss. Like the niece she'd just digitally deleted from existence hadn't just crossed her threshold. Difficult to feel grateful when you've been photoshopped out of your own DNA. I stood there for perhaps 20 seconds, studying that portrait with a mixture of shock and something that felt almost like clarity. There was Uncle Marcus in his signature burgundy sweater, the one he dons specifically for holiday photographs, because Patricia insists it complements his complexion. Patricia herself radiant in deep emerald, her smile authentic and warm. And Victoria, naturally, positioned centre stage laughing at some invisible witticism, effortlessly luminous in that way that had always seemed so natural to her. But me? I might as well have been a spectre who'd forgotten how to manifest properly. I retrieved the substantial manila envelope from my leather satchel, the one I'd been carrying for 4 months, waiting for precisely the right moment, and placed it deliberately on the antique console table among Patricia's carefully curated pine cones and miniature gourds. The weight of it felt momentous in my hands, like holding 4 years of meticulously documented reality. "Sophia, darling, you made it!" Victoria materialised in the doorway, champagne flute in hand, looking like she'd emerged from a lifestyle magazine spread. She offered me one of those calculated air embrace gestures that photographs beautifully but feels like embracing expensive wallpaper. "I was just telling everyone about the vineyard in Bordeaux. You should have experienced the sunset from the terrace." Her gaze landed on my envelope with mild intrigue. "What's with the formal-looking documentation? Please tell me you're not bringing legal work to Thanksgiving." I touched the envelope carefully like it contained something invaluable, which, in numerous ways, it did. "Some revelations require perfect timing," I said quietly, my voice carrying a gravity she didn't recognise yet. She rolled her eyes with practised elegance and glided back toward the great room, probably to continue regaling everyone with narratives of her latest adventure funded by, well, that was precisely what the envelope was about to illuminate. If you've ever felt invisible within your own family, present but somehow erased, this story is going to validate everything you've experienced. Hit that notification bell because stories about family truth-telling tend to get suppressed by algorithms that prefer comfortable deceptions. I stood in that foyer, looking at the family portrait that told the story they wanted the world to see. A story where I simply didn't exist. But here's the thing about being digitally erased from a photograph. It doesn't erase the person who possesses all the documentation. 4 months earlier, I'd been living my carefully constructed life of invisibility. You know the role, the reliable niece who never requests anything because she's been systematically conditioned not to expect it. The one who appears at family gatherings with thoughtful gifts and listens to everyone else's accomplishments while contributing just enough dialogue to avoid being labelled withdrawn. I was 34 years old, working as a forensic accountant, which, as it happens, was exactly the expertise I'd need for what was approaching. I lived in a modest loft in Hartford, drove a dependable but unremarkable Subaru, and had long ago accepted that in the Blackwood family ecosystem, I was supporting cast in Victoria's starring production. That particular October morning had begun like any other. I was analysing financial records for a corporate embezzlement case when my phone rang. Mrs. Rodriguez, one of the tenants at a property I'd never heard of, was calling about a lease renewal notice she'd received. "I apologise, I think you have the wrong number," I told her courteously. "I don't own any rental properties." "Oh, but you do, dear," she'd said with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious. 247 Riverside Drive, the charming Victorian with the wraparound porch. We've been sending rent payments to Blackwood Property Holdings for 3 years now, but the notice says all future payments should go directly to Sophia Blackwood. That's you, isn't it? I assured her it wasn't me and disconnected, but something nagged at me. Blackwood Property Holdings, my family's real estate enterprise, a business I'd never been involved in despite my background in financial forensics. That evening I did what forensic accountants do. I started investigating. If you've ever had that gut feeling that your family was hiding something from you, comment "I felt it" below. Because what I found next will validate every instinct you've ever ignored. What I discovered over the following several weeks would fundamentally transform how I understood my position in my family, or rather, my absence of a position in it. It began with public records. 247 Riverside Drive was indeed owned by Sophia Blackwood, me. According to the deed, I'd inherited it from my great-uncle Theodore when he passed away 4 years ago. The same great-uncle whose memorial service I'd attended, whose estate settlement I'd apparently missed because no one had informed me there was one. The property was a beautifully restored Victorian mansion in a prestigious neighbourhood, worth approximately $1.2 million. It had been generating rental income of $6,800 per month for the past 4 years. That's over $325,000 in total rental income that had been collected in my name without my knowledge. But here's where it becomes really fascinating. According to the banking records I was able to access as the legal owner, that rental income hadn't been accumulating in some forgotten account gathering interest. It had been systematically transferred to various accounts belonging to my family members. Victoria's European adventures, funded by my inheritance, Patricia and Marcus's kitchen renovation, my money, the new Tesla in their driveway, also mine. Even Victoria's down payment on her trendy Soho loft had originated from rental income generated by a property I'd inherited but never knew existed. For 4 years, my family had been living off my inheritance while I assembled IKEA furniture and shopped at discount grocery stores. And if you're thinking, surely they had a good reason, keep watching. The text messages I found will show you exactly how they justified stealing from me. The paper trail was immaculate. Someone had forged my signature on a power of attorney document, granting them legal authority to manage my property. Someone had established automatic transfers to distribute the rental income among family accounts. Someone had been extraordinarily careful to ensure I never discovered any of it. But here's what they hadn't anticipated. I'm exceptionally skilled at locating hidden assets. It's literally my profession. I spent weeks documenting everything: banking statements, forged signatures, property records, rental agreements. I hired a handwriting expert to analyse the forged power of attorney. I interviewed the tenants, who confirmed that they'd been told the property was being managed by the family trust on behalf of the owner, who preferred to remain anonymous. The more I uncovered, the more a pattern emerged that extended far beyond simple financial fraud. This was systematic erasure. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they'd stolen my identity as a beneficiary, as a property owner, as someone who mattered enough to be informed about her own great-uncle's final wishes. I found Uncle Theodore's actual will, not the summary I'd been given. In his own handwriting, he'd left me a note. For my great-niece, Sophia, who sees the world with clarity and deserves a foundation of her own, this house represents the stability and independence I always knew you would require. Build the life you envision in it. He'd recognized something in me that my own family had overlooked. Or perhaps they'd seen it too, and that's exactly what had frightened them. The envelope I was carrying that Thanksgiving evening contained copies of everything. Banking statements showing exactly where my inheritance had gone. The forged power of attorney with expert analysis proving the signature wasn't mine. Rental agreements executed without my knowledge. Even screenshots of Victoria's social media posts from her Tuscany excursion, geotagged with locations that my rental income had funded. But the most incriminating piece of evidence was a series of text messages I'd recovered from Marcus's phone during a family dinner when he'd asked me to help him with a technical issue. Messages between him, Patricia, and Victoria discussing how to manage Sophia's expectations about Uncle Theodore's estate and how to keep things streamlined by not involving me in complex property management decisions. "She's better off not knowing," one message read. "She's not business-minded anyway, and this way there's no complications for her." They'd convinced themselves they were protecting me by stealing from me. They'd made themselves the heroes of a narrative where I was too incompetent to manage my own inheritance. Standing in their foyer that Thanksgiving evening, looking at a family portrait that had literally erased me from the picture, I understood that this wasn't about money. This was about visibility, about mattering, about whether I was a full member of this family or just a convenient supporting character in their story. The holiday dinner unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance. Marcus carved the turkey with ceremonial precision. Patricia praised Victoria's worldly sophistication and joie de vivre at least 6 times during the meal. Victoria regaled us with stories from her latest journey, complete with photos on her phone of picturesque European markets and stunning architecture. No one inquired about my work, my life, or anything that might require them to see me as a person with my own experiences worth discussing. I was furniture that occasionally passed the cranberry sauce. After dessert, as we moved to the great room for the traditional gratitude circle, I noticed how they all positioned themselves strategically around the new portrait, like it was the centerpiece of our family narrative, which I suppose it was, a narrative where I'd been edited out with the same casual precision you'd use to remove a power line from a landscape photograph. "Before we share our gratitudes," I said, standing near the console where my envelope waited like a patient truth-bearer, "I have something for all of you." I retrieved the envelope, feeling its weight, its significance, its potential to alter everything. Hit the like button if you're ready to see a family get exactly what they deserve. Because this envelope contains 4 years of receipts they never saw coming. I'd prefer you saved this for later, I said, handing it to Patricia with the kind of smile you give when you're about to watch someone's universe shift on its axis. But naturally they opened it immediately. My family had never been particularly skilled at respecting boundaries, especially mine. Patricia's expression changed first as she saw the banking statements. Then Marcus leaned over her shoulder and I watched him recognize his own forged signature on the power of attorney. Victoria looked puzzled until she saw the screenshots of her own social media posts with calculations of how much each trip had cost in rental income. "What is this?" Patricia asked, her voice carefully modulated in that way that meant she was trying to control a situation. "That's my inheritance from Uncle Theodore," I said calmly. "The one you've been managing without informing me for 4 years." The silence that followed was different from comfortable family quiet. This was the silence of people realizing they'd been exposed. "Darling, this isn't what it appears to be," Patricia started, falling back on the script she probably used when clients questioned her real estate practices. "It appears that you forged my signature to steal my inheritance and used the money to fund Victoria's lifestyle while I worked overtime to pay off student loans," I said. "Which part of that assessment is inaccurate?" Marcus cleared his throat. "We were protecting the property value, managing it professionally. We were planning to tell you, if you've ever heard 'we were going to tell you' from people who clearly never intended to, drop 'liar' in the comments, because his next excuse is even worse." "When?" I interrupted. "When?" I interrupted. "After you'd spent all of it? After you'd mortgaged it to fund more of Victoria's adventures? When exactly was I going to be informed that I owned a property worth over $1 million? Victoria finally found her voice. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know where the funding was coming from." "But you didn't ask either," I pointed out. "When Patricia and Marcus suddenly had extra money for your trips and your loft down payment, you didn't question it. You just accepted it as your due." I walked over to the mantel and gestured to the portrait. "Just like you accepted this, a family portrait without me in it, because it's easier to erase me than to explain why I matter." That portrait moment, that's when I knew this wasn't just about money. If your family has ever literally or figuratively erased you from their story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. "We can resolve this," Patricia said quickly. "We can work something out, make it right. You can't resolve 4 years of systematic theft," I said. "But you can stop pretending it was for my own good." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. "I've already contacted an attorney. The property ownership has been restored to me as of yesterday. The tenants have been notified that rent payments should go directly to me starting December 1st. Your access to my property and my rental income ends now." Marcus's face flushed crimson. "If you're going to be vindictive about this..." "Vindictive?" I laughed, and it didn't sound like my usual accommodating chuckle. "I'm being legal about it. There's a difference." I looked around at their faces, shocked, guilty, defensive, calculating. These people who had raised me during summers, who had taught me to be grateful for scraps while they feasted on what was rightfully mine. "I'm not requesting an apology," I said. "I'm not asking you to feel remorse or make promises about doing better. I'm simply reclaiming what was always mine and walking away from people who think so little of me that they literally erased me from the family picture." "Your family," Patricia said desperately. "Family forgives and moves forward." "Family doesn't forge signatures," I replied. "Family doesn't steal inheritances. Family doesn't erase nieces from portraits and hope nobody notices." I moved toward the door, past the portrait that told their version of our story, past the Christmas tree decorated with ornaments from my childhood that apparently didn't include memories of me worth preserving. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back," Marcus said, his voice tight with the kind of anger that comes from being caught rather than being wrong. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob and looked back at them one final time. "I think that's the first thing we've agreed on in years." The cold November air hit my face like truth, sharp and clean and honest in a way that House had never been. I walked to my car with steady hands, no tears, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally stopped pretending that being invisible was the same as being loved. 3 weeks later, the messages started. Texts from Patricia about misunderstandings and family healing. Voicemails from Marcus about working things out and not letting money divide us. Even a lengthy email from Victoria about how she was devastated to learn where her travel funding had originated and wanted to make things right. I didn't respond to any of them. By spring, I'd moved into the Victorian that had always been mine. The same Victorian where Uncle Theodore had lived for 50 years, where he'd tended the rose garden that was now mine to restore, where he'd sat at the oak dining table that now held my morning coffee and evening paperwork. And this is where the story gets beautiful. If you're still here, you deserve to see what happens when you choose yourself over people who never chose you. I found more of his handwritten notes tucked into books and drawers throughout the house. Little messages of encouragement, observations about family dynamics, and expressions of hope for my future that he'd never been able to share directly. "Sophia has always been the perceptive one," one note read. "She just doesn't realise it yet because they've convinced her that insight looks like silence." Another, "Independence isn't selfish when dependence is dangerous." And my favourite, taped inside the medicine cabinet where I found it months later, "The people who truly love you won't require you to disappear in order to make them comfortable." I reduced the rent for my tenants, the Rodriguez family, by $300 a month. They were retired educators living on fixed incomes, and they'd been paying inflated rates while my family pocketed the excess. When I told them about the reduction, Mrs. Rodriguez cried and said I was the first landlord who'd ever treated them like human beings rather than revenue sources. That meant more to me than any family reconciliation ever could. I renovated slowly and thoughtfully, new paint in colours I actually preferred. A garden planted with herbs and flowers that would bloom according to my preferences, not someone else's aesthetic vision. A home office where I could work my forensic accounting cases, surrounded by evidence that I was capable of managing my own affairs quite competently. 1 year later, I was sitting in that garden on a Sunday morning when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message contained a single photo, another family portrait, this one clearly older, showing a young woman in cap and gown standing alone while 4 empty chairs sat in the front row of what appeared to be a graduation ceremony. Below the image, a message. "They did this to me too. Are you ready to hear about the others?" I stared at the photo for a long time. The young woman looked familiar in the way that family resemblances echo across generations. Her smile was strained, like she was trying to appear happy for a camera, while her heart was breaking. I typed back, "Who is this?" "Your cousin Emma, Theodore's other great niece, the one who went no contact 6 years ago after they pulled the same inheritance scheme on me. I've been waiting to see if you'd figure it out on your own." Another message followed immediately. "There are more of us, Sophia. Theodore left detailed instructions about what to do if the family tried to erase his great nieces from their rightful inheritances. He knew exactly who he was dealing with." I saved the number and walked back inside my house, my actual house, with my name on the deed and my great-uncle's blessing in every room. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at Theodore's dining table, now mine, and thought about patterns and erasure and the difference between being forgotten and being systematically disappeared. Some spotlights blind you with their intensity, others simply allow you to see clearly for the first time how long you've been sitting in darkness. Being visible isn't a gift you earn through perfect behaviour, it's a right you claim by refusing to accept invisibility as love. I learned this the difficult way, but I learned it completely. But first, tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered you were systematically erased from family decisions that directly affected you? Drop erased but not forgotten if you've ever been the family member who was expected to disappear for everyone else's comfort. And if this story gave you the courage to investigate your own family's financial mysteries, hit that subscribe button. Join our community of people who refuse to stay invisible just because it's convenient for others. Some families erase you from portraits to make their story look cleaner. But the truth has a way of developing in the dark, and when it finally sees light, the picture it reveals is always more honest than the one they tried to frame. Even when, especially when, that truth means you have to step out of their frame entirely to find your own.